folks, and welcome today to Our Game with myself, Shane Stapleton. No Michael Verney this week, but we've more than an able deputy in Colm Keys of the Irish Independent. We're going to be talking about his book, Chasing Sam Maguire, in a little bit. Brilliant book there. I have a copy of it myself here, which was delightfully sent out to me. So, Colm, first off, how are things with you?
Very good, Shane, and thanks for having me on. Great to be joining Our Game in the absence of my colleague Michael.
Is he as esteemed as he likes to make out?
Oh, he's very esteemed and honourable and all of those things you'd associate. He has the esteem of a Supreme Court judge in matters hurling. We always refer to him for anything like that. So, yeah. No, he's a great colleague.
Can you tell us your thoughts on how the club championship has been since, obviously the inter-county wound up there quite a while ago? Have you enjoyed what you've seen?
Not really, Shane. I have to be quite blunt about it. I've been at some pretty poor matches. The ill-fated Mayo County final, I was up there in Castlebar on that slightly wet evening. And believe me, it was every bit as bad and worse. And I know, obviously, the Ballina manager has come out and launched a defence of that. And that's obviously fair enough. And I'd have to say I'd be as fair as I could be on these things. But that was a really, really poor standard match that evening. Low on entertainment. I'm not sure whether people streamed out that day. I'm not sure that's the reason. Maybe they went for a cup of coffee around the back. I couldn't say that. But it was a poor quality match. And I've seen quite a few in terms of quality. Now, I'll add, Trillick and Scottstown was a fantastic game last weekend. I really enjoyed that. One of the reasons was, and I think there's probably something in this, is that both sides really pressed up on the kick-out, particularly Scottstown really went after the Trillick kick-out. It made for great entertainment. There was some great battles, particularly out around the middle of the park between Richie Donnelly and Darren Hughes. Obviously, it's been mentioned. But it was a fantastic battle, and they really both went out. And the scoreline reflects that, even though it was extra time. There was lots of opportunities created. So from that point of view, that was a particularly good game. It stood out for me. But by and large, I think some of the county championships were poor. I think there's a very the level of caution and conservatism has really seeped into club football as well. Obviously, hurling's a bit different as well, and obviously that's a separate argument. But in terms of the club football championships, there has been now in Ulster, and Ulster can get a bad rep. The entertainment has been really good. I was also at Gowna and Glenties, and after a slow enough start to that game, things broke out there too. And if you look at there's been a point, games have gone to extra time. There are so many close games and that, but everywhere else just hasn't been great.
Yeah, there's been a lot of games where you're expecting something big and then it hasn't quite popped. But this weekend, O'Loughlin Gaels are up against Na Fianna, and having watched O'Loughlin's in a couple of their games, and your venerable colleague Verney, he said that O'Loughlin's would lose against both Mount Leinster and Kilcormac, but at the same time he predicted O'Loughlin's to win Leinster. So figure that one out for me.
I can't understand that. That's a three-card trick in some way, isn't it? I don't understand that one there. That's you'll have to prize the logic out of that from.
Yeah, well, I hauled him over the coals in front of Mark Bergen of O'Loughlin Gaels the other day when we had him on the show, so I wasn't going to let that one go. But their match this weekend against Na Fianna, and to be fair to Na Fianna, this is their first time in Leinster, and they've gotten all the way to the final, beating Naas the last day, and before that, Raharney of Westmeath. They've been quite impressive. I'd have to say, this is a game I am looking forward to, especially on the Croke Park turf.
Yeah, and to achieve that without Donald Burke, and obviously Donald Burke is laid up with a very significant injury. I thought Donald Burke would have been back by now, and I did note he said on Monday when he was speaking to the media, not this weekend, but potentially if they were to get over this hurdle, obviously he might look at an All-Ireland semi-final. It's a very serious and significant injury for any sportsman for what has happened to him. But often in a player of that stature's absence, sometimes the compensation from everybody else brings more out of those who are left behind. I always recall Colm Cooper and the despair around Kerry in 2014 when he did his knee in the All-Ireland Club semi-final, and it was Eamon Fitzmaurice's second year. The general consensus would be you can write off Kerry, and they came and won an All-Ireland title that year without their marquee player. And Na Fianna have come, obviously, this far, won a Dublin championship that they were despairingly close to with Donald Burke a few years back against Kilmacud, and they've come strong, and they've picked off 2 teams. And look, beating Naas is a pretty good standard. Naas are a very, very decent team operating at a high level in Leinster now and have consistently showed that. So for Na Fianna to push by them in that respect is showing good form. Obviously, Brian Ryan is a big addition to them, and obviously he's been with Limerick he was on the Limerick squad during COVID, and he's been pushed through, and he's a big addition to them. And obviously Liam Rush is a leader, and so from that point of view, they have leadership and strong characters in that team, and they have forwards too. That can score, and that's something. If you were to debit O'Loughlin Gaels in some way, and obviously they dethroned Ballyhale Shamrocks, but I just question whether they have the forwards to keep winning and to keep pressing on in this All-Ireland Club Championship.
Actually, interestingly enough, Mikey Butler reckons that, about Croke Park, it will suit us. Our forwards are lightning fast. They'll love it up there, and I think they'll really shine. So I'd say Owen Wall is probably the first one he's thinking of when he says that. But Conor Heary's another guy who's, been absolutely brilliant in the half forward. Just as you mentioned, Donald Burke being out and the team still excelling and maybe stepping up more so than they normally would because he's not there. Matty Donnelly being out for Trillick this year, along with Mikey Gallagher, isn't it mad the way teams can do this?
Isn't it just? I mean, and obviously the Tyrone Championship is such a difficult championship to win. I mean, that there has been no repeat success there for, I think it's almost 2 decades at this stage. It's really hard. So without Matty Donnelly, others have stepped up, and obviously his brother Richie is one of those to really step up, and Stevie O'Donnell, that was very good for them the last day, got the goal and the point. So, or Sean O'Donnell got the goal and the point the last day. So, yes, players do take on added responsibility. They're not looking around for their main man all the time, and leaving the onus on him to dig them out of the hole. They went after it themselves, and they got results out of it. And Trinnick won't say they were unlucky. I think the better team won last weekend, but they came so close to it. Without a player of Matty Donnelly's stature, you'd wonder, put him back in, and maybe we are looking at a potential repeat in Tyrone, a successful defence next year.
Did it stand out to you last week watching, when Scottstown had panned over to David McCaig and their backroom team at one stage, and you see Kevin O'Brien, the former Corofin manager who led them to 3 in a row All-Irelands, that he's there on the sideline. And I mean, potentially, you never know, he could be coming up against Corofin at some stage. And we saw Jerome Johnston step down from his role last year because he didn't want to come up against his sons in Kilcoo. Like, if you go further afield, it could end up, in time you're facing your own, which is probably a slightly awkward one, to say the least.
It is that Kevin O'Brien link, and I'm not sure has it been made official in any sense, but I'm sure he's in an advisory. It looks like, I mean, we can't say for certain he's certainly not listed, but it looks like he's in an advisory capacity. They actually have Peter Donnelly as well, who has been around quite a few counties, namely Tyrone, but he's been with Cavan and Monaghan as well in recent times. So he's a lot of experience at intercounty level and now bringing that to Scottstown. But it's always an interesting dynamic for any manager to be facing or have an involvement against his old team, particularly a guy that was involved in a 3 in a row and would be aware of a lot of the talent, even though the Corofin team seems to be changing quite significantly as well, even since the 3 in a row. You see their Farrahers are now on making an impact off the bench. Obviously, Gary Sice is still there, Kieran Malloy and Liam Silk. But by and large, there's new players coming through, and that's Corofin. But it can be an awkward dynamic if a manager and our manager, or even in this case, as we think, an advisor is coming up against his old team. But obviously Scottstown and Corofin have to go and win their provincial titles, and even at that, I think they can only schedule to meet in an All-Ireland final because the draw is Ulster and Leinster this year, or in January.
Yeah, so just to come back then to Na Fianna, and without Donald Burke, and Shane Barrett hasn't been starting every game. He came on the last day. He's another former Dublin player up until a couple of years ago. Like, they have forwards that have really stepped up. Colin Curry, Sean Curry's been excellent, and Colin's taken over the frees, and Donald Burke was telling me the other day that all the way up, Colin used to take the frees ahead of him. So it's nothing new to him. They have the likes of Kieran Stacey, who's been very good, AJ Murphy, who scored a hat-trick against Crokes not so long ago. But you're coming up against a defence that has 2 current All-Stars and Mikey Butler Hugh Lawler. And let's be fair, Paddy Deegan isn't exactly a slouch either. The man is a monster, particularly at club level. Are realistically 𝘕𝘓 going to be able to get enough scores here to get over the line?
You make a very good point about that defence. It's really when you say that in the context of a club team, and we're used to the Cody Mullen, TJ Reid triumvirate in terms of attack, and obviously Colin Fennelly there as well. You're used to that with Ballyhale at one end, but the flip of that almost is that Deegan, Butler, Hugh Lawler. Hugh Lawler is just improving. He just seems to improve with every game over the last couple of years. He's a really strong, forceful attack out in front. I love the way Hugh Lawler gets out in front and almost plays from the front and is willing to go get out ahead of Aaron Gillane, get out ahead of whoever he's picking up. It's great. It's great to watch, and it's great to watch a defender like that. And I think he's as good as anyone for being able to step out in front and gather a ball. And Paddy Deegan obviously suffered in the All-Ireland final in 2022, but came back so strong this year. And that's the measure of him. And, he has that capacity to play centre back, or if it's midfield, they had him up front, up at full forward a few years back as well able to deliver. And obviously he got the score. He got the defining score as well earlier this year too. So all of those things play into it. I think that's a really strong defence. They can pick and choose which of the Currys they want to close down, whoever they want to close down. I think it's great options. And I'd be inclined to agree with you that however further O'Loughlin Gales will progress, and obviously they're going up the line, I do think they have the defence to close down those 𝘕𝘓 threats.
Yeah, and the only thing I wonder, can 𝘕𝘓 find a way to, I mean, obviously nobody's really going to expose Hugh Lawler, but find a matchup that he wouldn't like. He'd love someone like he had the last day, James Morgan, James Gorman, a big physical player, someone to wrestle with. So do you put in someone like an AJ Murphy? Colin Curry's obviously a smaller, nippier size profile. He's not a small man, but you know what I mean? So maybe they can go after him that way. But I just don't see 𝘕𝘓 scoring enough here. If Donald Burke was playing, I'd probably be thinking more 50-50, but I'm going 60-40 O'Loughlin's.
Yeah, and I'd be inclined. I think this is where they will really miss Donald Burke, because I think Donald Burke obviously has that long-range shooting ability, and some of his scores, obviously in a Dublin context earlier this year and last year, have been magnificent. But I think Hugh Lawler has the measure of any shape or size of a forward. I think he's equally able to mark a faster, nippier player because of that ability, that speed of thought and speed of movement that he has to get out in front. It's almost like he's a bigger version of Mikey Butler in some respects. He can really, and the ball sticks to him too. So I think he's a great competitor. And I don't really think, Shane, it makes that much difference what 𝘕𝘓 try to dislodge him in that respect, because I think he would command that area regardless. I think he's in such good form.
And Paul O'D had to go off injured early in the second half, only at the weekend there. So I don't know if he's going to be right. He's in and around the Dublin panel. So again, I'd be going O'Loughlin's. Would you be the same?
I am. Yeah, I would think O'Loughlin's. I think, look, obviously that the form line is there from beating Ballyhale, albeit maybe not a Ballyhale team that has been going as well and maybe just has reached the end of the line for now. I do think they will regenerate and come again. But it's been a long cycle for them. And when you include the contribution to the Kilkenny team of some of their protagonists, there comes a time in Corofin, they all find it, that the end of the line comes, and that's that. And they were probably ripe for picking off in Kilkenny this year, but by extension, I think O'Loughlin Gales will kick on and will win the Leinster title.
And so if we jump over to the other provincial final, then I suppose the curtain raiser, Kilmacud Crokes against Naas, they won't see it as a curtain raiser, but it's the third year in a row that they've met in the Leinster Championship. Both teams are 3 in a row county title winners, but Crokes won in 21 by 14 points to 7. Remember, we had water breaks back then.
That's right.
Yeah, 2022, they won 3-14 to 14, so it was a bit more comprehensive. And Paul Mannion missed both games. Now, Derek Irwin missed that 2021 final. Do you find it difficult to go against the Crokes team with Mannion and Shane Walsh?
I do, but I do think Naas will improve on those two outings. I think they're probably getting better. If you look at Derek Irwin's contribution the last time against St. Lomans, he scored 1-7. I mean, he's a really elusive player. But you said it there, Mannion back for these games, playing almost as well as he has ever played for Dublin. And he had a great spell from 17 through to 19 with Dublin. But but he's regained his hunger. He's regained that zest. I covered the Dublin County final, and a couple of the points he put over were just magnificent. I mean, we talk about David Clifford all the time, but we can talk about Paul Mannion in much the same breath for some of the things that he can pull off on a football pitch are just great to watch as well. And just those two scores in the county final, kicking them on the run, that high looping kick that he has, it's a joy to watch. Shane Walsh hasn't been playing as well, and indeed in last year's he did well enough in last year's Leinster Championship. He probably tapered off a bit after that, but he seems to be playing with a bit more freedom, I would say, and he's certainly getting fitter. He didn't look all that fit in the earlier Dublin Championship games for sure, but I think he's probably more at ease with the fact that he's a Kilmacud player this year than he was last year. I think that probably burdened him, and I think he admitted as much himself in recent times that, you know, a lot, and even dealing with the season he had, and even though he's into his 30s now, or early around that mark now, he probably found it difficult to deal with the season he had for Galway even, and there was a lot coming at him. I think he's unburdened by all that now, and it's probably starting to show in his performances. He's on the ball a lot. I still think he hasn't just really skinned the defence in the way that we know he can do it. Maybe that's coming this Saturday, perhaps. But I think the fact that Paul Mannion is back, and, you know, Kilmacud are always able to find a player to fill a gap. They're always able to find a player to fill a gap. And some of their best players, I mean, there's a guy now, Dan O'Brien, at cornerback. As a club player, he is as good as there is out there as a defender. On the ball, he just makes such great decisions, joining the attack whenever. I think he's as good a consistent club player over the last few years as there has been. Obviously, Mannion and Walsh and these guys take their games to another level, but without ever stepping up to county level, Dan O'Brien is right there. And similarly, Darragh Mullen and Shane Cunningham as well. So they have a lot going for them. But the biggest thing they have going for them is that Paul Mannion is back. Not only back, he's playing really, really well. But notwithstanding that, Naas are improving. The first 3 in a row in Kildare, that's something since the 1950s as well. And they've kicked on, dug themselves out of a difficult position against St. Lomans. And when they got to extra time, they kicked on and won well. So that's a good sign for them too. A lot of their players are improving. Alex Byrne being one as well, in addition to Kerwin. He seems to be kicking on and playing really well as well. So, look, I do think they'll be closer. But in Croke Park, you just have a vision of Mannion doing a few extraordinary things, and maybe Walsh finding gaps that he hasn't just been finding so much. Notwithstanding, he got a terrific goal in the county final as well. That should be mentioned too, that, you know, he took off on a counter. But all around, I think Kilmacud are at ease. They're already champions and they're enjoying their defence, and I do think they'll kick on and win.
Yeah, and I even think in the past, like, Shane Horan could start, or maybe he won't, but like, he's a former Offaly player. You have Cian O'Connor, who's been around Dublin panels. Sometimes he comes off the bench, sometimes he starts. Like, they have that depth that you're talking about. The only question is, I wonder, you know, why sometimes a team comes close to the precipice, as Kilmacud did against Raheny in the county championship, almost get knocked out. Sometimes that can spur you on. We've seen Ballyhale against like Rhinas and St. Thomas's before, and they're right there on the cusp, but they kick on and win the All-Ireland anyway. The last day out, RD pushed Crokes very, very hard towards the end of the game. Do we see now a Crokes team that are vulnerable, or are they just going to kick on now when the real tests begin?
Well, Shane, I'd suggest for any team that's been on the go for as long as Crokes are, and you must remember this is the third year of their cycle, say, that have been full year cycles. They obviously went into February in 2022 with the Kilcool game. And they went to the end of January then with the Glen game last year. So they're into the third full year cycle of what they're at. So you will have dips like that. And you mentioned Ballyhale and Rhinas, and there's been times when Ballyhale have, you know, looked on edge, and they were in a similar cycle. So sometimes they have to pick and choose their battles. And you might say, well, can you pick and choose your battle in a semi-final? I think there was probably an element of complacency in subconsciously. They felt that they would probably just get over the line against Raheny that day, and were almost caught. And Raheny are an improving team, and you might say, well, how could you be complacent against a team that has Brian Fenton running the show for them? Yeah, that's maybe something. But a team that's on a cycle like that sometimes just has to pick and choose their moments. And They almost do it subconsciously. I think that was probably the case there. But since then, I think they were probably still always in control, even though RD came back at them early in the second half and shut down that gap quite quickly. I do think Crokes would always be in control. And I think when they get to Croke Park, they'll become a different team again.
So I want to talk now about your book, Chasing Sam Maguire. So the Sam Maguire Cup itself has been around for almost 100 years. And in this book, you're celebrating the heartbreak and the glory of the first 50 years of its history. So, number one, how painstaking was it putting... I presume this was a labour of love, because the amount of detail in this thing is absolutely incredible. And photographs and different bits of teams and everything. What did it take to put this together? Well,
the seed was sown initially by my co-author Dermot Riley, who we'd be in touch, and he's a great interest in the history and heritage, obviously, of the GAA and what has happened in the past. And he asked me one day, do you know the clubs? Where would I get the clubs of all the players who played in All-Ireland finals, or a record of who played in All-Ireland finals? And there are records of the teams there with initials, by and large initial. And if you look at an old program from the 1950s or the 40s, all you will get is an initial. You won't get the clubs. And you won't get the nicknames even. And there were so many nicknames in the past. And that was the genesis for this. Dermot asking me one day, where would I get it? And I thought, yeah, it should be somewhere. Someone should have a record of this somewhere. I says, I'll go and search. And I asked and I asked and I asked and I looked and all of that. But I quickly realized this isn't available. So we set about trying to collate the All-Ireland final teams and their clubs. And obviously there's extended panels. We've included extended panels. The programs will only ever have included 20 names, 5 subs, 6 subs laterally, but 5 subs generally, and sometimes a program, but there was no consistency to it. So we trawled, and we trawled through the archives, local papers, national papers, club histories, to see who was involved, tried to cross-check it, validate it, come up with what we could. And quite quickly we realized then, and you'll see it in the formatting there of the clubs, we include multiple clubs for some players because they moved around so often. And between there it is, yeah. That's it, yeah. So, yeah. Like, let's take 1949 with Cavan. They lost to Meath in the All-Ireland final. Over half of the Cavan team were playing outside of Cavan that year, either in Dublin, some were playing in Louth. There was the Gunnar Brady was playing with Garda in Cork that year too. So they were playing with 4 other different counties as well as Cavan. So players moved around so much. A club could fold one year and they'd all move to the neighboring club then, or they'd move to various clubs. So it was very, very difficult to trace. And even at that, I'm quite sure we have omissions there as well. There is no definitive way of telling, and there's no record of this. And quite often, players would have moonlighted with different clubs, and someone would say, well, such and such played with a club down in Galway in a particular year, but you might find he was illegal. Or so clubs moved around and players moved around and clubs folded. We did our absolute best we were 8 years tracking all this. And of course, we had great help from people up and down the country. There are keepers of the record in so many counties. There are people who assiduously gather information, and we had help from people from there's a man in Mayo who would have helped James Rock. He just loves to gather this information. He's a steward with the Connacht Council, and you'd see him up in McHale Park and in Castlebar. And there's another man, Pat Dunnigan, down in Offaly, fantastic help for that. George Cartwright in Cavan. You go through all of these people and they keep the records, and I hope that the GAA can harness and harvest their work in time to build a much better database that's there and a much better set of records for all of these things into the future. And I believe it is happening, and it is coming on stream in the next couple of years, that the records for All-Ireland championships and inter-county games will be significantly progressed in the next couple of years.
Yeah, I'm just looking there and I'm seeing some interesting stats like gate receipts in certain finals. 1948, the gate receipts were £6,129, so €7,783. Like, I just like, sort of the level of detail is incredible. Is there anything that really anything that struck you or knocked you for six? Any particular bits of data or factoids or whatever? Did anything bowl you over?
Well, actually, one thing jumped out at me, and I'm a long time obviously covering Gaelic games, and I wasn't aware that up until 1945, I knew in the initial stages, up until 1945, it was no sideline kick. The ball was thrown in for a sideline. That only
like
changed.
AFL, backwards.
Thrown in like that. Yeah. The ball was thrown in instead of kicked up to 1945. That grabbed me. A small thing, but nonetheless, it grabbed me and during the research. But we actually, not only the teams and those details, but then we said and even at that stage, I was never sure, well, are we going to publish this, or how will we publish this? We started to gather information around the All-Ireland finals themselves, what happened on the day, and we included details like that about gate receipts, but also you'll see final miscellany and some of the statistics around that. We produce a set of facts and observations from around that year or that particular final, and then we included some statistics and events and facts of a social context globally and nationally. You'll probably see it there as well, that we included that just to set context. And then we started to research the championships themselves, and obviously that led to so much detail after that, and that was really exhaustive to go through the archive of every particular championship. And not only would we trawl through the national papers, but you go to the local papers. Some great local papers back in the 40s and 50s covered very extensive coverage of Gaelic games. You take the Anglo-Celt was a primary example there of a local newspaper that not only around Cavan, but they would cover the whole of Ulster in that time. You'd extract a lot of information out of that, and the Meath Chronicle, Drogheda Independent, papers like that, the Kerryman, you get a lot out of them. And obviously you would cross-reference between them all. I mean, even to establish the scores, to identify exactly the scores in all the All-Ireland finals, you could have two different newspaper reports that would be different with regard to the scores. So that level of accuracy might not have always been there, but you'd always find the local papers would have definitive word on it. So there was a great help to go back to that. So obviously that meant that the index of the book, Shane, is 29 pages. So there's a lot of names. I couldn't believe the index, and obviously there's potentially a lot of grandfathers and maybe even great grandfathers at this stage who feature in that book. Players from Waterford, Tipperary. Another thing that struck me, and enjoy this, I could not believe how good a footballer, and I've often heard it that Babs Keating was a great footballer, until you go back and read the reports through the 1960s and into the early 1970s as well, how prolific he was at football. That really shone. And I suppose the other thing would be some of those players from lesser counties. Mickey Kearns from Sligo really stood out to me in my research, how good he was. He could score 13, 14 points, carry the team on his back. In 60-minute games, he was able to produce that. A really fantastic footballer. Again, I would have heard a lot about Mickey Kearns from Sligo, and actually we honoured him in our Hall of Fame with the Gaelic Writers Association recently. And he was there for that event. But it came across to me how prolific he was and how good. And obviously Packy McGarty from Leitrim as well. So we tried to shine a light on as many of these names, players that wouldn't necessarily have made All-Ireland finals. The Sean O'Neill and Mick O'Dwyer on the cover, and that's a picture from 1968, the great Kerry Down All-Ireland final that Down won for the third time. But we tried to shine a light on players from the lesser counties. So there's a lot of information, let's say, about the foothills of those championships as well, that's contained in the book. But look, we wanted to bring together a concise record of the All-Ireland Championships in the time of Sam Maguire. It's the first 50 years because the content became so great. We had so much, we had to divide it in two. We hope to produce a second part for the anniversary of Sam Maguire in 1928. It'll actually be presented for the 100th time in 2027, but in 2028 then it's the 100th anniversary of the first presentation. Obviously Kildare won that, but that's what we hope to update it, bring it up to speed, bring it up to the current date in 4 years' time.
Well, look, best of luck with it. I know it's an absolute labour of love. You can just see even by going through it, it's beautifully presented. So best of luck with that, Colm, and hopefully we'll be chatting again soon.
Shane, thanks very much for having me on. Great to be here.
No problem at all.